Hello YouTube. Today I'm going to talk to you about something very few of you may have heard of called gangstalking and electronic harassment. Now these two things I had no idea about until approximately 18 months ago. It's not that I didn't believe them, it's just that I'd simply never heard about them. With that said, had I heard about them, I would be very unlikely to believe it, because if you look yourself online, you'll see that some of these stories which are being spread on the internet, and some of the explanations for some of the experiences people are having, are quite difficult to believe. However, I did hear about it 18 months ago, and that was as a result of research which I'd performed myself to try and explain some of the experiences I was having personally. Now, to get into the details of my own story, what happened to me was approximately 3 years ago, when I was in my early 40s. I moved into a property in Southampton in the United Kingdom. Now, when I moved into that property, almost immediately, when I was trying to sleep at night, I noticed some very strange things going on. For example, people were slamming doors shut at ridiculous hours, 4 o'clock in the morning, which is, I just considered it people being, a little bit rude, a little bit inconsiderate. You sometimes get this in shared houses. I'd lived in a lot of shared houses prior to that, so I assumed that's what it was. However, as time went on, within a few months of me moving into the house, I began to notice something which I couldn't explain, something which was just very, very strange. And what that thing was, is that whenever I went to sleep at night, and only when I went to sleep at night, I had the bizarre sensation of my lower legs and my feet vibrating. What I thought it was at first was concussion. Sometimes when somebody plays very loud music, it can create physical sensations, so actual force. If you'll know this if you've ever been to a concert and you've been close to the speaker, you'll feel the force of the speaker. So I thought it was something to do with that. It was very strange. It was subtle, but it was consistent. That's the strange thing about it. Once I tried to sleep, it wouldn't stop. And I found that very, very strange. And what I thought it was for a number of months afterwards was somebody in close proximity, perhaps in an adjacent room, jumping up and down on the floor, and somehow that was creating a force wave or a shock wave, which I was feeling in my legs. It seemed to me at the time to be the most plausible explanation for what I was experiencing. However, there were a number of strange things about this phenomena. Most seriously is that it would follow me around the room. For example, if I tried to sleep on the bed, I would feel it in my legs on the bed, but there was a sofa across the opposite side of the room, and it wasn't a small room, it was quite a sizable room. But when I moved across the other side of the bedroom and tried to sleep on the sofa, within minutes of me laying down, I would get exactly the same sensation in my lower legs and my feet. Now, at the time, like I say, I didn't have a clue what this was. I'd never heard of electronic harassment. I'd never heard of gang stalking. It was just an unexplained phenomena which I couldn't get to the bottom of, and it continued. It continued for over 2 years. I was dealing with it. At first it was just at night time. It was just when I tried to go to sleep at night, but eventually that changed to when I became exhausted after not being able to sleep for almost 2 years. And gradually that changed, so that even if I tried to sleep during the daytime, it would happen in the daytime as well. But interestingly, the other strange thing was that it would only occur when I tried to go to sleep. I didn't notice it at all when I was awake. If I was just sitting down, using the computer or whatever I happened to be doing, I wouldn't notice it. It was only when I tried to go to sleep, and then within minutes of me trying to go to sleep, my lower legs and my feet would start vibrating. It was extremely strange. And like I say, for 2 years, I didn't know what was going on. So there were other strange things which went on during that 2 year time period. but nothing which was too untoward. The other thing I'm thinking of was that somebody kept continuously using a hammer against the adjoining wall to my room. It was a terraced house, and there was one adjoining wall with the next property, and somebody began hammering that for hours and hours a day. I mean, I just presume they were doing construction work, but if I was in the day, and particularly because I wouldn't have slept because I was being kept up at night, that kind of got monotonous after a while. But I complained about it to the local council after it didn't stop for a number of months, and eventually after I complained, it did stop. So at the end of the 2 years, like I say, I was becoming I was becoming quite fatigued and exhausted because I wasn't able to sleep regularly. I didn't know what was causing the problem at night, but it was impossible to sleep through. I put in dozens of complaints to the landlord. It was never solved, and so at the end of the 2 years, I decided that I was going to move out. And for that month, the first month in the 2 years that I'd stayed there, I was late with his rent. Now, within 4 days, his personality seemed to do a complete about turn. This is the landlord. He became very aggressive, very malicious, and he began spamming me, for want of a better word, with text messages, emails, and there was also a WhatsApp group which he set up for the property, and he began using that to kind of try to bully me and convince the other tenants to kind of ostracize me from the property. It was a very strange set of circumstances because he began doing all this within 3-4 days of me falling late with that rent payment, and he began to construct a series of bizarre narratives. One of which was that I'd been complaining about a non-existent issue for 2 years, just so that at the end of the 2 years I could not pay him rent. So it seemed to make no sense to me, the things that he was saying, but the general gist of it is he began to be a very, very nasty person, and I hadn't realised that kind of aspect of his personality existed previously. I'd had little to do with him. I just kind of paid rent, and he'd left me alone. But when I finally did decide to move out, this was when his personality kind of flipped, really. One thing in particular that he did, he sent me an email which was quite curt, and it read, "Either pay your rent or I'll have you institutionalised," which was very, very strange. I just at the time considered it to be an empty threat, and kind of did my best to ignore it. But a few days after that, there was a knock on the door, on my bedroom door, and I opened it to find two paramedics stood outside my bedroom door, and he'd apparently called these guys and given them some sort of cock and bull story in order to get them to come round to the property. So I apologised that they'd been called out, and they left. A couple of days later, exactly the same thing happened again. I had a longer chat with them this time. It was the same two paramedics who came round, and the landlord had told them that I was being violent, which was absolutely untrue. I was sat in my room, and I was playing video games, and at this stage I considered what he was doing was extremely malicious. I called the police, reported him to the police. They didn't seem to be particularly interested. They just seemed to be under the impression that it was a civil dispute and I should contact a local solicitor. Eventually I got hold of a solicitor. It wasn't local, but I did get hold of a solicitor, and he appeared at that stage to back off after a few letters. I mean, there was still some strange behaviour going on. For example, we sent him a letter which basically said I was going to stay in the room until I'd found somewhere else, because he was really put me under pressure to just leave. So my solicitor sent him a letter saying I was going to stay in the room until I'd secured alternative accommodation, and within 2 days of him receiving that letter, I came home to find a sign on my door saying that he thinks the room's been abandoned and he's going to come in and presumably repossess it. I mean, this was all. I mean, apart from the personality change, it was kind of I just thought at the time. I thought I just didn't know this guy very well, and as it turns out, he's a bit of a nasty character. But even thinking back, it was more than that. And the reason I'm aware of that now is because on one occasion I came back. I was only leaving the property really once a week to go grocery shopping. I mean, I wasn't, I'm not a particularly social character. I kind of keep myself to myself as much as possible. But I was leaving the property once a week to go grocery shopping, and on my regular weekly grocery shop, I came back, and the landlord wasn't in the property when I came back, or at least I didn't see him. I went into the kitchen, through the communal areas. I came upstairs, didn't see any sign of him. But within 5 minutes of me arriving back at the property, he was knocking on my door, and I thought that was kind of a bit strange. Was he watching the house? How did he know I was back? Where was he? That he could get here in 5 minutes with me. With me coming back, it was all a bit weird. But again, I just presumed there was a plausible explanation, such as he was maybe in one of the other tenants' rooms speaking to them. Maybe he just happened to be around the corner. Maybe it was just a coincidence. So I didn't really think anything more about it. But shortly after this, there were a couple more incidents. I mean, he cut the electric to my room on one occasion, but gradually after the solicitor began to communicate with him, a lot of this stuff stopped, and he appeared to leave me alone on the face of things. However, that's when I first began to experience signs of what I now understand to be gang stalking, quite severe gang stalking as well in my case. And it began for me. With a knock on the door, on the main door, the door through to the house, which I answered one day, and there was an employee of a company called DPD, which is a delivery company. And the guy at the door had a parcel for somebody I'd never heard of, and he asked for my name, which I gave him. He handed me a parcel, which was a huge parcel, but it was essentially weightless. So I mean, I was thinking, well, what's in this? And he handed me that parcel. Like I say, I didn't know who it was for. It was a foreign name. I put it down, and I just remember thinking that there was something strange about the encounter. I can't even put my finger on it. It just seemed a little bit strange. His attitude seemed a little bit strange. So in any case, from that point on, every time I would go into town, I would see one of these vans marked DPD, and I'd see them regularly. Now the strange thing is, before this, I didn't even know this company existed. I'd never seen a van marked DPD. Didn't know anything about the company, but for some reason, once that guy had come round and delivered that parcel, I was seeing these vans everywhere. Every time I would go out, one of these vans would drive past me, or I'd walk past one. It was it was kind of it was definitely strange, but I mean at this stage I still I just put it down to coincidence. Didn't know exactly what was going on, and that was that. But other things started to happen also. So I started to experience break-ins into my room. One thing which the landlord did do is he broke the lock on my door. So essentially, I couldn't lock my door when I went out. I had to leave the property insecure. I mean, I could shut the door, but it wouldn't lock. So every time I would go out, I'd come back and I'd discover that somebody had been in my room. And the way I discovered this would be quite odd, because it wasn't like anyone had stolen any major items. I mean, certainly some stuff was stolen, but small items. It was more that there were signs that people had been through my things. So stuff wasn't in the place where I'd left it. And as I say, some stuff was stolen, but small items, for example, believe it or not, a pair of nail clippers was taken from my bag. A letter which I'd written and I was going to send to my father was also stolen from my bag. It was just little stuff like this, but it was very, very strange. And of course, because I couldn't lock the door, I really had no proof of who'd done it, even though I knew full well it was the landlord, or somebody associated with him at least. But I had no way of proving it, because because essentially I couldn't close my door. So, in theory, it could have been anyone who was inside the property. There were other strange things. Such as one very late one night, I think it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, I heard somebody come into the front door and they were wearing heavy boots. It sounded like, quite a heavy chap. And they came up the stairs, and I don't know exactly what happened, but all my electrical equipment started to go haywire. My computer blue screened. I couldn't switch it back on for about 15, 20 minutes. So it was, something, strange had happened, and I wasn't entirely sure what it was. But I started to experience more and more of these kind of, strange incidents. It was kind of a build-up, really. It started with just, seeing these DPD vans more than I thought was kind of explainable, just through the law of chance, just through, through coincidence. But again, I just put it down to my imagination. I thought you're being paranoid. It's nothing more than that. But again, like I say, there were physical signs which couldn't be ignored, such as the break-ins. Stuff was going missing in my room. Stuff was being moved around. It was all very subtle, and it seemed to just be designed really to kind of intimidate me more than anything else. So the weirdness continued. One of the other things which happened is I bought a new phone, and straight out of the box there was a call divert on it, which I hadn't set up. It wasn't putting any of my calls through to their intended destinations, and I had to go into the settings and remove a call divert. And when I finally did make the first call through that phone, instead of putting me through to the person that I wanted to be put through to, it put me through to an unknown party who just started heavy breathing on the end of the phone line, like some sort of parody of a 1980s stalker movie. So I don't know what was going on with that. I stopped using the phone. I got another phone after that. But what kind of forced a decision for me to leave the area was I came home one afternoon and discovered that somebody had been into my room and drilled a hole into the top of my laptop. Why, I don't know. Even who, I don't know. I mean, I presume it was something to do with the landlord, but I don't know. Like I say, I didn't see who'd done it. So it was a very, very strange thing. And at that point, I decided the best thing for me to do was to just leave the area. And because I still didn't have any clue what was going on, I'd still at this point not heard of gang stalking. I just wasn't aware of any of it. I just presumed that if I just left the area and moved somewhere else, it would all be over. Things would all be back to normal. But unfortunately, I was wrong in that assumption. So I called my parents up. I moved back to Chester, which was is about 400 miles away from Southampton, right across the other end of the country. And I just assumed naturally, as anybody would, that whatever was going on in Southampton, I'd leave in Southampton. Surely it wouldn't follow me all the way to Chester. But that's exactly what happened. I stayed with my parents for, I believe it was about 3 weeks when I got back to Chester. And immediately, as soon as I was back at the property, what I discovered is that every time I would leave the property, I would be repeatedly passed by vans marked DPD, which of course had been happening in Southampton. It was far beyond the stage where it could have been coincidence. I mean, there's no way that just the sheer number of times it happened. I mean, it was every time I left the house. As ridiculous as it sounds, and I do know that to a certain extent it does sound ridiculous. Why would a company be sending vans to follow me? It sounds absolutely ludicrous. Completely appreciate that, but nevertheless, that is what happened. Every time I would leave the house, one of these vans would drive past me, and not just drive past me, but the behaviour of them was also extremely odd. For example, I remember leaving my parents' property to go to Morrison's, which is about half a mile's walk away. And within 10 paces of me getting outside the front gate, a DPD van accelerated. It was way beyond the speed limit, accelerated straight to my position and parked exactly next to my position. And I don't mind saying that my fight or flight mechanism kicked in, because it was just so strange. It just screeched to a halt right next to me. There was another occasion where I turned a corner and there was a DPD van which was parked. And as I turned the corner and as I approached this DPD van, it turned its ignition and slowly drove past me in a way which I can only really describe as intimidating. It was just it was it was just absolutely bizarre. It was just not something that, not something which is normal, not something which, which you would expect to, to happen, and certainly, something which can't really be explained in a way which makes it sound like, you're particularly sane. If it just sounds so ridiculous. But I mean, it reached the stage, before I'd left my parents' property where, I mean, I didn't even have to leave the house, uh, because I mean, I smoke cigarettes, and my parents they don't allow any smoking in the house. So if I wanted to smoke a cigarette, I would at the very least have to open the front door and smoke outside the front door. And the weird thing was, is every time I would open the front door and smoke a cigarette, without a shadow of a doubt, there would be a DPD van which would suddenly pull up opposite the house and go to deliver a parcel to to one of the nearby residents, who I might add were strangely never in when when they tried to deliver these parcels. But it was just bizarre. And I didn't know what was going on. I questioned whether I might be going crazy, and it was around this time that I decided to get onto the internet and research this, and figure out whether anybody else had ever had any similar sort of experiences. And boy, did I find a lot of people. It seems to be that that these are common tactics that they use. Whoever they actually are, I'm not sure anyone still knows. But whoever this group is, or this network is, who are conducting this harassment, the tactics and the techniques they were using to kind of mess with me match all the other experiences that I read about online. I was going through them all, and I was just thinking, oh my God, this is exactly it. This is exactly what's happening to me. So that was kind of a eureka moment. I moved out of my parents' house several weeks later, moved into another shared property in the local area, and once again, the strange activity followed me. I was still seeing DPD vans every time I would leave the house. They would literally be within 5 minutes of my location, seemingly. When I would leave the house, just seeing an extraordinary number of them. I decided eventually. I mean, it got so intimidating that in the end, instead of leaving the house in the daytime, I decided to do my weekly shop during the evening time, because I figured these vans are only out till 8, 9 at night, or whatever it may be. So I figured if I did my shopping a little bit later, then I wouldn't have to see them. And that was true. I mean, I began, just if possible, not leaving the property in the daytime, and doing my weekly shop at night. And then uh, something even stranger happened. The first time I went out at night to do my shopping, I was walking along a long main road which is called Sealand Road in Chester. And as I was walking to the local supermarket, which is probably 10-15 minutes away, I was passed by what I can only describe as a procession, or perhaps a convoy of Royal Mail vehicles. And when I say a procession or a convoy, I mean I believe it was six of them almost back to back. And at 8, 9 o'clock at night, that's kind of a strange thing to be seeing, because obviously they're not delivering mail at that time of night. I happen to know, because obviously Chester is where I'm from, and I'm quite familiar with the area. I happen to know that the Royal Mail depot is nowhere near Sealand Road. So again, that sent my radar off, and I thought, well, this is a bit strange. But at this stage, I was still kind of convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. I was just putting two and two together and making five. That oh, it's just a big coincidence. I was actively trying to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. That there was nothing untoward going on. It was, and my parents were of a similar mindset. And so anyway, a few days later, later, I discovered that I'd missed a few items when I'd gone shopping, so I decided to go back around the same time to the same supermarket. It was a different day, but it was roughly the same time. And lo and behold, again, convoy of Royal Mail vehicles, five or six of these vehicles, everything from a van to an articulated lorry, just bizarre. I remember thinking to myself, it was a strange sensation, because on the one hand you realise it's strange, on the other hand you think to yourself, well, they couldn't possibly be there just to mess with me. That just doesn't make any sense at all. So, like I say, I was still at the stage where I was just trying to convince yourself you've been online too much. You're just you're just imagining these things. But in any case, this journey that I was making to the supermarket to do my shop, I began doing that regularly during the evening. I changed days, I changed times. And from that moment on, every single time I would go to this supermarket, I would be passed by anywhere between 2 and 4, I'd say, Royal Mail vehicles. And the weird thing is obviously it's not strange to walk down the street and see a Royal Mail vehicle. They're everywhere. Of course, I'm fully aware of that. The strange thing is the sheer repetition of it, the fact that it was happening every single time I would leave the property. There wouldn't be an occasion that I would leave the property where I wouldn't be passed by several of these vehicles, and that's the strange thing. It's the consistency of it. Now, I mean, perhaps I shouldn't even really lead with this stuff because of just how bizarre it sounds. But that was my experience. That's what happened. And like I say, I'm in my mid-40s, never experienced anything like this before. It was just all very new to me, and very, very weird. But of course, I refer you back to earlier when I explained that shortly after I'd made the decision to move out of the property I was staying in Southampton, I had an extremely strange email from my landlord, which essentially read, "If you don't pay your rent, I'll have you institutionalised." And then from that, all this strange stuff started happening. So, I mean, I didn't think that was a coincidence. I thought, obviously, something's going on, but I still didn't understand what. By this stage, like I say, I was aware of gang stalking. I was aware that it was some sort of organised harassment, but I wasn't sure who was organising it, or indeed what its purpose was. And certainly these aspects, with the being followed around, weren't. I mean, they're not especially intimidating. It was annoying, certainly, but I didn't feel I was in, any particular danger. But if we move along to the electronic harassment aspect, and it's still at this stage, I didn't realise that had been what was going on in my previous address in Southampton. But shortly after I left my parents' house, I mean, there were no problems when I was in my parents' house with any type of electronic harassment, but when I moved into this new property, almost immediately I started to experience problems again, and they began one afternoon where I was just feeling a little bit tired. I don't think there was any particular reason for it. I thought I was feeling a little bit tired. I didn't think anyone was in at the property at the time, so I thought I'd get away with just a nap for a couple of hours. So I got into bed, tried to sleep. And as I was approaching sleep, I had a very strange sensation, which was similar, but not exactly the same as what was happening at the previous address. It was like an electric shock in my legs. I had no idea what the source was. But I mean, at first I just shrugged it off. I just, I didn't even try to find an explanation for it. I just, rolled over, tried to go back to sleep. Same thing happened again as I was approaching sleep. And from that moment on, it began to become a regular occurrence. When I would try to sleep, as I was at the stage where I was approaching sleep, I'd suddenly feel an impact, like I'd been hit with some sort of force, which felt, I mean, it was similar to an electric shock, but there was no pain as such. It was just that it would startle me awake. And like I say, that began happening fairly consistently when I moved into the new property in Chester. Now, at the time, although I was aware that there was some strange stuff going on, I was trying to kind of rationalise it all in my mind, and for some bizarre reason, which I don't even know why I would have even considered this an option, but at the time I thought, well, it's concussion again. Somebody is moving around within close proximity to me, and it's they're banging something. I'm not hearing the bang, but I'm feeling the force of it, and that's what's waking me up. So even after 2 years in the previous address, and having that experience and not being able to get to the bottom of it, my brain automatically began trying to rationalise what was happening at the new address in pretty much the same way. There was an Irish guy who was living above me, and I'm sorry to say, I kind of thought that he might be the culprit. Even though the timing of these jolts was very suspicious, because it was always at the point where I was approaching sleep. Just at that point where you're just starting to nod off. You're between being awake and being asleep. Now, obviously, I considered that it might be something psychosomatic. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but a myoclonic jerk or something like that, which I've experienced when I was much younger, but it certainly wasn't that. I was able to rule that out in a number of ways. For example, when it happened, usually I was getting hit in the legs, and as an experiment, what I did is I turned around in bed so that my head was in the 180-degree angle, essentially, from where it had been previously, and it happened again as I was drifting off, only instead of being hit in the legs, I was hitting the torso, which was where my legs would have been had I had been in the original position. So I was able to rule out something psychosomatic. It was definitely something external which was causing it, and it began to happen consistently. And again, I began to become deprived of sleep. A few months after I moved into the new property, I had the opportunity, because the Irish guy above me moved out, so there was a bit of a switch up in the house. People started moving rooms, and I had the opportunity to move into the opposite portion of the house. So initially, I'd been at the front of the property downstairs, and I moved to the back upstairs, so right at the opposite end of the property. Now there was, I remember when I made the move, for about a week, there were no issues with sleeping. I was able to sleep fine, and then about a week into me living in the new room, the problems began to start again. Only this time it wasn't as I was approaching sleep. I was able to get to sleep fine. It was when I was actually asleep, I would be woken up by these strange sensations in the morning. So that's what would wake me up, always like an alarm clock, as I'd be hit in the legs with some sort of force that I can't explain, and that is what would wake me up. And it was malicious, because if I didn't get up on the first time it happened, on quite a few occasions I was very tired when it happened, and I tried to go back to sleep once it happened, and if that was the case and I did attempt to go back to sleep, I would then be hit repeatedly, so 6, 7, 8, 9 times, until I was forced to get up. So eventually, it was a long process before I eventually began to accept what was going on, because I didn't understand that this kind of technology existed, that you can remotely harass somebody with energy, essentially. I don't understand. I still don't understand what it is which is being used, but from what I read online, possibly some sort of microwave weapon. I don't know. Any explanation I possibly give is speculation. All I can say for sure is that it's something external, and it's being fired at me with the intent to harass me. That much I'm certain about. As to what it actually is, I really don't know, because I'm not involved in that field. It's not my area of expertise. But in any case, like I say, this started happening consistently when I was in the new property. It followed me between rooms. Eventually, in the new room, it started started to get really bad, it, as well as waking me up in the morning, it would stop me getting to sleep at night. I started to get it again as I was approaching sleep. I would be hit with these jolts, and it gradually increased in intensity. It got worse and worse until Christmas week 2021. I was kept awake for 6 full days and 6 full nights. So every single time I would close my eyes during that period and try to sleep, I would be attacked with whatever this weapon is that was that still is being used against me. Like I say, that lasted for a full 6 days and 6 nights, and then it stopped on the 7th night, and I was able to finally get some sleep. During my time in that property in Chester, this happened 3 times. There were 3 occasions where I was kept awake for 6 full days and 6 full nights, in what I can only describe as torture. But even on the occasions where I was allowed to sleep, I would always be hit consistently every single night. At the very least, as I was approaching sleep, I would be hit with some form of energy weapon. And it began to get very difficult to function, because I was tired all the time. I was fatigued, and that's when I began to realise that this program, whatever it is that's being used to harass me, is quite sinister. Like I say, the attention I was getting from the various company vehicles was one thing. That's something which can kind of be laughed off, because I only need to go back into the house, and then I'm left alone. I don't have to experience that anymore. But the fact that I was being harassed and tortured while I was actually inside my own house is what made me realise that I was involved, or being involved rather, in something which was extremely sinister, and the intentions of which was to essentially torture me, to give me no form of escape, so that I could be harassed, in my own room. There were other things as well. While other strange things, construction work. When I first moved in, there was construction work already going on in the property next door, so I was kind of expecting a bit of noise from that. It was very, very severe. Lots of hammers and drills being used. But the strange thing is that when I moved rooms into the opposite side of the house, at the back of the property, within days, and it literally was within days, all of a sudden the neighbour on that side suddenly decided to get some construction work being done. So I had it on the opposite side of the house, and I just thought that can't be a coincidence. It just can't be. And I was also being disturbed from that point on by construction work going on at the back of the property. But by far the worst thing was these attacks. The electronic harassment, which was stopping me getting to sleep at night. I mean, it was just torture, really. It was just essentially torture. So the attacks at night started to get so bad that eventually I decided that I was going to sleep outside in the yard. I had a tent, a small tent, and I decided that I was going to use that and sleep outside to see if it made a difference. I was able to get some sleep when I was outside. However, I was also hit a couple of times by the same thing which had been hitting me when I was in my room, but it seemed to be more kind of just a warning, if anything, that we know where you are. We can still hit you when we're outside. But that aside, I mean, generally speaking, I was left alone, and I was allowed to sleep when I was outside. And other than it being a little bit cold out in the tent, at least I was able to get some sleep. So that was a brief break towards the later months of 2021. Unfortunately, however, when I'd moved into this new property, one thing I wasn't told by the landlady at the time was that the house was on the market. She'd kept that from me. I found that out later as I'd moved in, and she told me that I had to remove the tent because she was showing people around the property, and presumably it was going to be difficult to explain why there was somebody camping outside in the back garden in a tent. So unfortunately I had to return to my room, where the attacks quickly commenced again, and then continued. So while this was going on, other stuff also started to begin, which is kind of consistent with what I understand to be standard gang stalking. I started to see a lot of vehicles driving past me, beaming only a single headlight, which I believe is quite common to people who are experiencing this rather. The other thing which happened is I started, when I was going out in public, I started to experience a lot of people who would either walk past me or get close to me and perform kind of a really strange, exaggerated fake cough. Now, it's I wouldn't blame you, the ordinary person for thinking, well, how do you know it was a fake cough? It's done very, like I say, in a very exaggerated fashion, so that you're under no illusions the person is doing it on purpose. And much like the earlier incidents with the DPD vans and the Royal Mail vans, it's done continuously, so often that you quickly become aware that it couldn't possibly be happening by chance. I mean, it's statistically impossible for it to happen as often as it did, but just purely through the law of chance. I mean, it had to have been coordinated in some way. I mean, obviously, it's on the face of things, you would consider that to be extremely unlikely, that there would be some sort of network coordinating these strange kind of harassment tactics against you. But on the other hand, as I say, it would be mathematically impossible for it to happen as often as it did, just through pure chance or coincidence. It's, I mean, the very specific tactics which are being used against you, which are rooted in the behavioural sciences. I mean, they're essentially trying to sensitise you to certain things so that those things can be used to harass you in a multitude of different ways. But in any case, where I would notice the coughing in particular would be, believe it or not, in Tesco's. There were kind of two supermarkets which were situated very close to each other, and I used to use them both when I would go shopping. There was an Aldi and there was also a Tesco. Now, it didn't happen at all in the Aldi. Didn't notice anything untoward really in the Aldi store, but in the Tesco store, I started to experience multiple employees at the Tesco store walk past me and do a really kind of exaggerated fake cough as they would walk past me. I also noticed it on the tills a few times. There was one particular woman who kept doing it, and it was quite obvious to me. I mean, but perhaps not to anybody else because they hadn't been sensitised to it, but certainly to me, because I mean, just for example, on one particular occasion, there were three people ahead of me in the queue, and she had no cough for the first three people in the queue, and then as soon as it was my turn to get served, all of a sudden she developed a strange cough. These tactics, like I say, they're used purposefully to kind of to unbalance you, to cause you to believe that you're going crazy. It's a very sophisticated kind of program which is being used, and it's very sinister. I mean, it's got no good intentions behind it. The people who are doing it clearly are intending to harass you to the maximum effect. I mean, between the harassment I was receiving on the outside and also the attacks which were being conducted against me while I was in my own room, it was very much like living in a prison or a POW camp, and I'm quite sure that was the intention, is to cause me to feel that way. But it was a very, very uncomfortable situation that I was in. when I was going back to the tent, when I was staying in the tent outside in the backyard, another strange thing happened. This was after a couple of days I'd been staying outside there to try and escape the attacks at night. I woke up one morning and two holes had been drilled into the brickwork right next to the tent. Which was obviously quite strange and mimics the hole which was drilled into my laptop when I was just before I left Southampton. So I found that quite disconcerting. What the purpose of these holes are, I don't know, but in addition to the holes which were drilled outside, they were also, believe it or not, drilled into my room. How, I don't know. How access was gained to my room, I don't know. Um, but I also came back on a couple of occasions to discover that holes had been drilled into the wall, in the room I was actually staying at. Not in the original room. I didn't notice anything there, but when I moved rooms to the back of the house, that's when I noticed it had been done. Specifically, there was a hole which was drilled quite close to where I rest my head at night, and there was another one which had been drilled into an adjacent wall. So there was all this kind of really weird stuff going on, and it just seemed to be getting worse and worse. That was the main problems. It didn't seem to be stopping. It just seemed to be escalating, and over the course of many months, I decided that the best thing to do would be to start keeping a journal or a diary as such, and start recording these experiences, because they at first I just thought that it's just idiots messing around, and they'll leave me alone if I just ignore it. Pretty much like your mum tells you when you're younger, when you're getting bullied in school, just ignore it and they'll leave you alone, son. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It just seemed to be getting worse and worse. The more I ignored it, the worse it got. And so eventually, I decided to start taking notes and write a journal about all my experiences. And also, as well, because I had a mobile phone with a camera on it, I also decided to start taking video footage and or audio footage wherever possible, to try and kind of just make sure that there was some sort of physical record of what I was experiencing. So towards the end of 2021, like I say, I started keeping a journal, and also wherever possible just recording these experiences, just so I had some sort of evidence to present to somebody else. Now I've kind of breezed over most of this, because there was all kinds of stuff going on kind of a daily basis, and what I've tried to do really is just give you the main points, the stuff which kept happening repeatedly. But there was all kinds of stuff going on. Within 2 or 3 days of me moving to the new property in Chester, I remember that I came out of the front door one morning. It was early in the morning. Not sure exactly what time, 8, half 8, something like that. And there was a drawing of a stick figure who was hanging by a noose, and that had been left inches away from the door. It was right next to the door, and there was nothing else on this piece of paper. It was literally just a picture of a stick figure hanging from a noose. So very, very strange stuff. It was every single day, like I say, something bizarre was happening. There was another thing which I noticed shortly after moving into the new property, is every time I would go on a journey somewhere, it doesn't matter where it was, but just on a journey to a particular place. If I took that journey again, I would on the next occasion I'd take the journey, I'd find really weird stickers which were kind of printed in block capitals, but like the kind of the clownish block capitals that you sometimes see. What I consider, or what I describe as clown writing, like block capitals, really strange font, but they were all geared in. The messages on these stickers were kind of all the same, and they were centered around 9/11 conspiracy theorists, or 9/11 conspiracy theories. Something which I was quite active on 9/11 truth communities for a number of years, and these messages all seem to be geared towards sending hate in the direction of people who might not be convinced by the official 9/11 narrative. So to give you some example, I mean, what these messages said was just stuff like, if you all hate truth, just clap your hands, stuff like that. We hate 9/11 truth. There's stuff like that, and the strange thing is like I say, when I'd make an initial journey somewhere, I wouldn't notice anything untoward, and then on the second or the third journey I'd make, I would find these stickers placed along the route. And the weird thing is it didn't matter, where I was going or which direction. I would find these stickers placed along the route. So even if I walked, completely the opposite direction that I'd walked the first time I'd seen these stickers, I would find these stickers again. So it was just very, very strange that they kept cropping up specifically along the route which I was taking. But like I say, I mean, there was a whole bunch of weird stuff going on. It wasn't just any one thing in particular. It was there was strange stuff going on every single day of my life, and it all kind of, once it was accumulated, it all seemed to spell that, or rather, it all seemed to present the picture that I was being harassed in some way or some form by an unknown network or an unknown group for reasons which were unknown to me. If you remember me saying earlier, the house was on the market when I moved in, and I didn't realise that. I wasn't told that by the landlady, but I believe it was towards the end of January 2021. January 2022 rather, I apologise. So towards the end of January 2022, I was sent an email just to give me notification that the property had been sold and it was now under new ownership. Now the landlady at the time, once she'd made me aware that the house was being sold, she was adamant that nothing would change. All the original contracts would be honoured, everything would be as normal, and the new owners would be looking for long-term tenants in the property. So I kind of took her at face value with that. I mean, I can't say I wasn't, I wasn't a little bit sceptical as to whether that would be the case, but I just decided to play it by ear and see how things turned out. Now, for the first 2 months after the takeover, so until March 2022, nothing really changed. We were made aware that the new ownership continues to pay rent as usual, only albeit to the new owners as opposed to the old owners. But everything continued as normal. And then suddenly in March 2022, completely out of the blue, I was sent a text message asking if I'd received a Section 21 notice, which, for anybody who doesn't know about UK legislation, essentially a Section 21 notice is what we call a no-fault eviction notice. So it's what a landlord will send you if they want to evict you from a property, and the way it works is essentially a Section 21. You don't have to provide a reason for the eviction. So it's not that I did anything wrong. It's more the fact that the landlord has the legal right to just evict you from the property, provided they follow the correct legal procedure when they're doing so. Now, the particularly strange thing is that I was the only tenant who received one of these notices. At the time, there were 3 others who were living at the property. None of them received such notices. It was just specifically me, which obviously, given everything else which was going on, I did find to be a little untoward and a little bit strange. More so because I couldn't get a clear explanation from the new landlord as to why this notice had been served. Now, what happened afterwards is that I kind of realised that I would it needed to be a priority for me to find alternative accommodation, because at the back of my mind I was suspicious that this eviction notice which had been served on me had been done so maliciously. So I had it in the back of my mind that I must immediately find some sort of alternative accommodation. So that became priority number 1 for me. As soon as I received this notice, I began looking for somewhere else to live. active, and I was quite active about that. I was going to see various properties in a week, and trying to solve this problem which had landed itself on my lap. Now, the especially strange thing about this is that there were numerous properties which I went to see and met the landlord or the landlady. We struck it off, and I arranged to move in. I arranged with them, to pay a deposit, to get a contract filled out, and it was verbally agreed for me to move into the property. Now, this happened maybe 7 or 8 times where I actually got that far, that I'd made a verbal agreement with a landlord to move into the property. On each of those occasions, bizarrely, before the time actually came for me to move in, or often before I'd even paid the deposit, I was the landlord or the landlady that I'd made that arrangement with backed out in some way. I was sent strange text messages which didn't really make sense, or emails which didn't make sense, and they were all kind of geared towards backing out of that verbal agreement that we'd made. Some of them offered excuses which seemed on the face of things to be flimsy, such as, I forgot, I'd already promised that room to somebody else. Other landlords didn't offer me any excuses at all. They just said, I'm sorry, but the room's gone. And then when I tried to get some further information from them, they just closed off to me. They didn't answer my phone calls or my emails or my text messages. I began to look further afield. So bear in mind, as I say, at this time I was living in Chester, so I began to look further afield when the available properties in Chester began to run thin, and there was one in particular, one property I went to look at, which was in Crewe, which is about 20 miles or so away from Chester, and I made an arrangement to go and see this property. Got up early in the morning to get on a train over to Crewe, and I remember on that particular morning on my way to the train station. I think it was about 10 to 6 in the morning, and I was just approaching the train station, and a DPD van crawled past me just as I was approaching the train station. It was the only vehicle on the road, which is how I remember it. But in any case, I got myself over to Crewe, met the landlord. He seemed fine. Offered me the contract. He told me that he'd send it across via an email. He was using an e-sign service to gain signatures off tenants. So he promised me he'd send that across via email, and that was that. Like I say, I agreed to move in again, and this was about the ninth property I'd made such an arrangement with. On the way back from that meeting in Crewe, I remember it well because it was about a 10-minute walk back to the train station, and on the way back I was bumping into numerous fake coffers who were not just walking past me and performing this really weird exaggerated cough, but were also staring at me when they were doing it, which was twice as strange. But in any case, I got back on the train to Chester, and essentially just waited for this email to come through, which it did. A couple of days later, this email came through with a tenancy agreement on it. Everything looked okay, but before I actually signed it, I read the tenancy agreement, and I couldn't find anything in the tenancy agreement stating who would be responsible for paying the council tax on the new property. So just to protect myself more than anything, I just wanted something about this in writing. So I sent a quick email to the landlord and just said, hi, can I just confirm that the landlord would be responsible for paying for the council tax? He had told me that verbally during the meeting, but I just wanted something in writing just in case anything went wrong in the future, and I was looked at as being liable to pay the council tax, which is, it can be quite expensive, council tax. So it was just a quick email, and he didn't reply back, but a couple of hours later I got an email through from the company which hosted the tenancy agreement, agreement, the e-sign company which hosted the agreement, and it essentially just said that the document had been withdrawn. No further explanation, just that the person who'd uploaded the document had withdrawn it. So I tried to get back in touch with the landlord to find out what was going on. He ignored my text messages and my emails, and I think it was a period of about 24 hours. Eventually I managed to get hold of not the landlord but his business partner, whose number I had, and I had a telephone conversation with him, and that was just bizarre. He told me that the landlord had sent me an email, which he hadn't done, or at least I hadn't received any email. I was accused of messing them around, which was just it was just ludicrous. I mean, all I'd done is I'd written them like a one-line email just asking, "Hi, can you confirm you're responsible for paying the council tax?" So the stuff he was saying, it just made absolutely no sense. But the general gist of it was that verbal agreement we'd made was promptly withdrawn for reasons which I would say were a little bit strange. And it was, like I say, it was around the 9th, maybe the 10th time that had actually happened during my search. So by this time, my alarm bells were pretty much going off. I was thinking that, hang on, something really isn't right here. Is somebody contacting these landlords and somehow, I don't know, saying something to them to try to persuade them not to rent property to me? I mean, I know it sounds paranoid, but by this stage it had happened so many times that I just couldn't think of anything else which would adequately explain it. Because I mean, once or twice, fair enough, you expect to be messed around a couple of times by landlords, you take that in your stride, but this was literally 9 or 10 times within a period of maybe 3-4 weeks. So it was just really, really strange. I mean, it became absolutely, it became impossible for me to secure alternative accommodation in Chester. I mean, that's how bad it was. I couldn't find alternative accommodation in the city that I was searching in, despite having enough funds in place to do so. So that was the strange thing about it. I couldn't even find alternative accommodation in the immediate area. So it was all very, very strange. And because I did begin to suspect that there was more to it than just bad luck, I opened up an alternative account, because I was using Spare Room at the time, which is a website to look for alternative accommodation. So I opened up an alternative account and tried to keep that on the down low, really. And I began using the alternative account to look for alternative accommodation, and surprisingly, or not, depending on where your mind is right now, within, I think it was 3 or 4 days through the new account, I'd managed to secure alternative accommodation, and I'd paid a deposit on a new place. Only downside of that was it was right across the other end of the country. It was in Devon. So unfortunately, I was then faced with the prospect of moving once again to the opposite end of the country, which, I'll be honest with you, by that time I wasn't necessarily that opposed to, because my life was so difficult at that stage when I was living in Chester, because of the continuous harassment and the continuous stealth attacks at night, which were clearly designed to deprive me of sleep. I was kind of looking forward to it. I thought, well, maybe this time, third time lucky, I can get a fresh start, and maybe whoever's doing this to me will leave me alone. So I made my preparations, and within a couple of weeks I was on my way to Devon. Those final few weeks that I spent in Chester were particularly difficult, because there was kind of an increase in the intensity of the activities being performed against me in those final weeks. For example, on top of the attacks I was getting with whatever piece of electronic equipment they were using to kind of zap me at night. In addition to that, there was kind of a process of door slamming involving all of the other tenants I was living with in the property at the time. Now, this was the really strange thing, is again, much like the electronic attacks I was experiencing, it would occur only as I began falling asleep. So what would happen is I'd start to nod off to sleep, and then one of the other tenants in the property would slam his bedroom door, and that would kind of set off a chain reaction of door slamming. So the other tenant across the hall would then do it, and then the downstairs tenant would do it as well. It was extremely weird. Like I say, all within kind of 30 seconds of each other. So I'd start to nod off. The tenant next door would slam his door. Then the guy across the hall would do it, and as I say, the guy underneath would do it. And this happened on, it wasn't just once. This was happening regularly in those final few weeks I spent in Chester. It kind of occurred to me, certainly towards the end of the time I spent in Chester, that whoever it was who was responsible for this kind of this harassment program against me, they were extremely powerful, because they were able to kind of secure the participation of numerous people who were close to me, who were surrounding me, and even seemingly complete strangers who I didn't know. It was all very, very, exceptionally strange, and certainly prior to this experience, I wouldn't have considered that anybody would have that amount of power outside of government. I'm not directly accusing the government. I know that a lot of people do think that that's who's responsible for this, but I don't really want to speculate too much. I just want to report the actual experiences that I've had. So without blaming anyone specifically, it's quite difficult to imagine who would have the amount of power to be able to mobilise the sheer amount of resources which were being put to work against me. But in any case, as I say, I then moved across to Devon. Now, on the morning of the day I moved across to Devon, I remember as I approached the train station, again, just like the time I'd gone to Crewe, it was very early in the morning. There were very few, if any, vehicles on the road, but I do remember that as I arrived in the train station, roughly at the same place I'd seen the DPD van, that the last time I'd approached the train station that early, a Royal Mail van came crawling across the road, and again, just as had been the case with the DPD van, it was the only vehicle on the road. But in any case, like I say, I arrived at the train station, I began my journey, and there was strangeness going on all throughout the journey, and what I mean specifically by that is, I changed trains, I think it was 3 or 4 times, because it's quite a long distance from Chester to Devon, but on each of these trains I experienced the people doing the exaggerated fake cough around me, and that was on each and every one of the trains which I got on during that time. It was quite strange, because I remember I think it was on the first train, because it was very, very early at this stage. It was barely 6 o'clock in the morning. There were only 2 or 3 other people on the train, but one of them, it was a middle-aged woman who was in the same carriage as me, and she was repeatedly doing this fake cough. So by the end of the journey, I had it in the back of my mind that I was possibly being monitored. That's not even entirely true. By the time I finished my journey, I was fairly certain that I was being monitored, because aside from the fake coughing, another thing which happened is, I remember in one part of the journey, we were right in the middle of the countryside. There was seemingly nobody around for miles. We were essentially, running through the mountains. I believe it was the Cotswolds we were going through. So there was nobody around for a fair distance. But I remember looking out of the window and see, because the corner of my eye, I'd noticed a glint, which was the sunlight reflecting off a vehicle. Now this was the only vehicle in which was within sight. As I say, we were in the middle of nowhere essentially, and my eyes were drawn to this vehicle, and as I focused in, I realised that it was a DPD van, which was like I say, was the only vehicle, must have been within dozens of miles. I just remember looking at it thinking, what is going on? Just what is going on here? In any case, like I say, I mean, I got off the train eventually in Devon, reached my destination, and I got a taxi from the train station to my to the new place which I was due to move into. Now the taxi driver, again in a bit of weirdness, seemed to be fine on the actual journey, but as soon as it pulled in and I paid him, it was literally within, I think, 15 seconds of me giving him cash for the journey, he suddenly developed a strange fake cough as well. I couldn't get into the property when I arrived because the landlord had apparently gone to see his brother in London. I was relying on one of the other tenants to be here to let me in, so I couldn't actually get in when I first arrived. So I was kind of stood outside with all my stuff, and as I was doing so, somebody else walked past me, and again did a very kind of exaggerated a fake cough on the way past me, and then spat on the ground for good luck afterwards. So I knew by that stage, like I say, I was being monitored in some way. Still don't know who the actual group is who are doing it, but I knew by that stage that my destination was known, and whoever this group was, they had people who were capable of following me to various parts of the country, which is obviously quite disconcerting because it's very difficult to imagine any kind of group which has branches in all these various cities which I'd been. I mean, by this stage, it was Southampton, Chester, Crewe, and now Plymouth in Devon, which I'd moved to, and I'd experienced now this strange phenomena in all of these different cities. When I moved into the new place, I mean, things kind of calmed down a little bit for a couple of weeks afterwards. In hindsight, I think that's probably because you think people were planning a lot of stuff. So, but things did calm down for a good couple of weeks. There was a little bit of a break from the stealth attacks which were going on at night. They became a lot less severe. Eventually, though, things began to devolve again back into what they'd been before. Now, one thing which I did experience when I came to when I moved to Plymouth in Devon, although as I say the harassment kind of it continued, but what I did notice was a switch in the tactics. So they kind of changed what they were doing, or the dominant methods which were being used to harass me. Over the course of a couple of weeks, gradually my sightings of these DPD vehicles and Royal Mail vehicles kind of died down. At first, they continued sending these particular vehicles to intercept me. When I crossed the road, for example, I was just seeing a lot more, a lot more than usual. But I mean, as I'm talking now, I mean it's been several months now since I've even seen a Royal Mail vehicle or a DPD vehicle. So they appear to have stopped this particular tactic, but they've moved across to others. So, for example, the fake coughing which I first experienced in Chester, that's been escalated a lot since I moved across to Plymouth. It wasn't happening that often in Chester, just enough for me to notice it, and only in certain places and in certain stores which I would visit. There's been a big increase in that since I've moved to Plymouth, so that it happens now pretty much every single time I leave the property. If I go into town, there'll be numerous people waiting to do these fake coughs. If I walk into stores, there'll be employees who will do it in stores. So there's been a big increase in that, as I say, since I've moved across. The other thing which I've noticed an increase in is is the number of vehicles who were performing the one headlight tactics on me. So driving past me with only a single headlight, or even parked up with a single headlight. I've the one of the really weird things is that where I've moved into, it's right opposite the main train station. So I've seen that there have been numerous trains which have parked up in the train station beaming just a single headlight, and what I've noticed through monitoring this now for a number of months is it seems to be one particular train company which is doing it. That there are kind of two train companies which use that main station that I've seen, which are Great Western Railway, and the other one is Cross Country Trains. Now Great Western Railway, I haven't noticed anything untoward from the trains there. It always seems to be Cross Country Trains who are doing it. So I mean, I've got, like I say, I must have by now probably 24 examples, two dozen different sets of video footage showing certain trains parking up at the train station beaming just a single headlight right opposite my house, and that's over a period of, let's say 7-8 weeks, and they are all cross country trains. Like I say, not one of them which I've seen has belonged to Great Western Railway. So, like I say, that there was, there's been a change in tactics, or at least a change in the dominant tactics, the ones which are used to harass me. DPD and Royal Mail, they both gradually dropped off until now. I'm not seeing these vehicles at all anymore. But I am seeing an increase in other activity. The other thing which is being done is when I'm going outside in the daytime, I'm seeing dozens upon dozens of vehicles which are driving past me, beaming both headlights brightly at me, which I believe is a technique called brighting. So I'm talking convoys of them. So I'm seeing a lot of that. I mean, I presume it must be a different group which is doing it, but obviously connected to the group who was doing it in Chester. One thing, unfortunately, which hasn't stopped, and which increased within a few weeks of me moving to the different area, are the kind of stealth electronic attacks I've been experiencing at night, which feel kind of like being electric shocked at the point where I'm just about to fall asleep. Like for the first couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, that I didn't experience much of that, or at least it was subtle, but that's gradually increased in intensity to the point where I'd now quite literally describe it as torture. I'm being tortured by that every single night. I mean, there's not a single night which goes by where I'm not attacked with this weapon or this device, whatever it is which is being used against me. Not a single night goes by where I'm not attacked with it exactly at the point where I'm beginning to drift off to sleep. And recently they've amped this up as well, so that some nights I can quite easily be hit 30 or 40 times by this weapon in a single night. And in fact, going back the night before last, I was attacked for over 12 hours straight. I mean, I didn't get any sleep whatsoever. I mean, these people are really serious about harassing you. I mean, they're not messing around. They're really trying to torture you, and obviously because they're using stealth tactics to do it, they presume they can just get away with doing it. And indeed, that's, to date at least, that's been true. There's been very few, if any, prosecutions of these people. I mean, I've tried putting in police reports about it, haven't got anywhere. I mean, essentially, I've contacted virtually every human rights agency on the internet. I've contacted the police, I've contacted MPs, and nobody seems to want anything to do with this, which is very, very frustrating, obviously, when you're being tortured on a daily basis. But that's the situation at the moment. I've now been living in Plymouth for a number of months. Unfortunately, whoever these people are seem to have contacted a number of my housemates and also my landlord, because two of the housemates at the property plus my landlord have also started regularly doing or performing the exaggerated fake cough during conversations with me, which is quite disheartening. And the other thing that my landlord has done recently is he's decided that he's going to put the rent up by £100 a month, and he did that 3 months into a fixed 6-month term which I'd signed with him. So I was paying £375 a month, and then 3 months after moving in, he then decided he wanted to put that up to £475. I mean, I believe that he's doing that because he wants to make the place unaffordable for me. Somebody's probably spoken to him, told him a pack of lies about me, and he's decided he wants to get rid of me for whatever reason. So it's very, very difficult when you, as I'm sure anybody knows who's listening to this, who's experienced it themselves. It's constant harassment, constant torture, and nobody seems to believe that it could actually happen, but unfortunately that is what's happening to an awful lot of people. The worst part, as far as I'm concerned, are definitely the electronic attacks, the stealth attacks, which are happening when I try to sleep, because that's just, I mean, it's what I consider to be an act of pure evil. I mean, these people they're really trying to make your life as miserable as they possibly can, which is why they hit you exactly at the point where you're beginning to fall asleep. And the other thing is if we look into that a little bit deeper, it's what's most disconcerting about that might not even necessarily be what they're actually doing. It's more the fact that I can't explain how they know when I'm beginning to fall asleep. That's the truly strange thing. I mean, everywhere I go, I mean, certainly when I was living in Chester, everywhere I was going, I'd be intercepted, on junctions and corners by specific company vehicles, which is all designed to send the message to you that we know where you are at all times. But I'm not sure how that's possible. I mean, there must be some way of keeping somebody under surveillance, which is deadly accurate, and which can be performed by people outside the normal jurisdiction of the law. So, I mean, there must be a way to where my kind of vital signs are being monitored. So, for example, breathing rate or heart rate, and there must be a way for that to be done remotely, because that's the only explanation for how anybody could know when I'm beginning to fall asleep. It's just, you see, it's not. When I first moved into the house in Southampton, this first began happening, it was pretty much as soon as I turned the light off and tried to go to sleep. That's when I started experiencing it. But now it's changed. It's not like that anymore. I can turn the light out and try to go to sleep, and I'll be undisturbed maybe for an hour afterwards. But absolutely guaranteed, the moment that I start to transition into sleep, that's when I'll be zapped by whatever it is that they're using against me. So clearly, somebody is able to access some sort of biological information which is telling them when I'm beginning to fall asleep, and that's extremely disconcerting that anybody would be monitoring my either my breathing rate or my heart rate to try and establish when I'm going to sleep, so that they can pick that particular time to torture me. But I mean, it can't be. From my perspective, it can't be denied. When this happens to you 30 times in a single night, every single time when you're beginning to fall asleep, and it also happens to you when you are actually asleep as a means to wake you up, it's very difficult to kind of deny that somebody is monitoring your sleeping pattern, and it's extremely sinister, extremely. In any case, I'll leave it there for now. I mean, I'll produce more videos in the future, maybe speculate about what I think is going on. But I wanted to get across my story, exactly what had happened to me, and exactly the experiences I've had. So the electronic harassment has been going on now with me for 3 years, and the actual the organised harassment, or the gang stalking, that started approximately 18 months ago, and that's followed me now from Southampton to Chester to Crewe for a day, and then to Plymouth. So 3 or 4 different cities, all in different places in the UK, and it seems to be showing no signs of stopping. Whoever is doing this, they're extremely serious. They want to impact my life as much as possible, make me as miserable as possible, and I can only believe the various sites I read, which say that the intended goal is to try and either make you kill yourself or be incarcerated in a mental institution. All the behaviour that I'm seeing from these people seems to be geared towards those two outcomes. So I really believe what I'm reading when you know when people say that. These guys, they're pure evil. There's no, whoever's doing this, there's no, there's no justification for it. I mean, you're intentionally torturing a human being, hopefully to their death. So there's no excuses for doing that at all. Whoever is responsible, and whoever is performing this and orchestrating it at the top level, they're clearly a very disturbed human being, a very twisted, disturbed human being, who is essentially trying to get away with a form of covert murder. And it's very depressing that we can't get the help that we need to have this program stopped. It's incredible, really. It's incredible that something like this could actually happen. I'm aware that the technology that they're using is covert, and the tactics that they're using are covert and very precisely measured, but even still, it's shocking that this could actually happen in the modern world. Anyway, I'll leave it there for now, guys. That's my story, and I'll produce more videos, possibly link some of the video footage I've got at a later date. But pleased to share it with you, and I wish you all the best.